A great match. Okay, hold on a moment. Having a bit of technical difficulty moving the slides forward. Okay, here we go. With respect to the details of this webinar, you will start in listen-only mode. You may ask your questions via the question window. However, this webinar is also being recorded and you will be sent a recording link. In addition, as we get to the latter part of the webinar, as advertised, we will open up the opportunity for you to ask your questions live as we go along. This webinar is brought to you by the CCTA Centers Collaborative for Technical Assistance with additional support from the ATE Centers project, and the material is based on work that is funded by the National Science Foundation. There are 4 centers that are currently sponsoring the CCTA: the National Center for Convergence Technology, which I am privileged to lead, South Carolina ATE National Resource Center, Florida ATE Center, and the BioLink Center. Our purpose was originally to respond to the Department of Labor with respect to technical assistance from us to the DOL TACT grants. As some of the TACT grants are expiring, though, our activities are more focused on the National Science Foundation and the opportunities for providing competitive proposals to the National Science Foundation. Our deliverables are webinars. You're participating in one today. Plus, I hope all of you actually listened to the webinar last year this time on the same subject. And you will see that there were many other webinars that are there that you can refer to for information. We also have best practices that are documented that are there, and we host a convening, and we will be talking about those as we get toward the end of this presentation. Let's start with our poll. Are you involved with an NSF grant, a TACT grant, or both? We need this information to be able to provide this to our evaluator. Let's give just a few moments to answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll wait just a moment and we'll display the results. It takes just a moment here. We may have a bit of difficulty at this point, but I do believe we have managed to capture this information.
And your results are showing.
Okay, I'm sorry, they're not showing on my screen as a presenter. Okay, fine, thank you. Can you go ahead and read the results off?
Sure, 36% NSF, 3% TACT, 24% both, and 30% neither.
Okay, terrific. I'm sorry, it was not showing on my screen, and thank you, Christina, who is helping with the technical aspects of this presentation. On the next poll, we'd like to know how many people happen to be listening with you. If you will take a moment and answer that, that would be very helpful. Oops, okay. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Christina, when they're showing, when the results are showing, would you please read them off?
So 74% have no one sitting with them, 16% have one, and 5% have two or more, or two.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you helping us with those polls. So without further ado, let's go into our presentation. We have Dr. David Campbell, who is a lead program officer for the National Science Foundation, who is assisting us today. He is going to talk about the ATE program and some particulars about the current solicitation. Then I will talk to you about several different aspects of preparing a competitive proposal. And then Dr. Campbell will cover several changes in the PAPPG, the policy guide that is also working with the solicitation with respect to being able to prepare a competitive proposal. So, Dr. Campbell, would you take over?
That's found right here. We've got a few due dates that'll be listed on the cover page. We don't anticipate any major changes for the next year, but we have had a couple of changes since the past year. And so, do I have the slides, or can you advance? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, just say next slide, and I'll do it.
Thank you, Ann. So, we have various tracks or directions for you in which you can request funding. We have many types of different kinds of projects. So you can have projects for professional development, for instance, or instrumentation, or things of that nature. We have tracks for centers. We have national centers and resource centers. And we have a track for targeted research on targeted research in technician education, for example. We anticipate making somewhere between 20 to 25 new awards. Awards can range for projects from $75,000 to $200,000 per year, with typically a duration of up to 3 years. The maximum budget for projects does not exceed $600,000, including coordination networks for ATE. We have a track called Small Grants for Institutions New to the ATE Program. So if you haven't had an award from the ATE program in the last 10 years, you'd be eligible for these. We'll make 12 to 20 awards up to $225,000 each, typically spread over 2 to 3 years. And we would expect the budget request, of course, to match the scope of the project. We have a track for adaptation and implementation. We hope to make 10 to 15 awards here. $300,000 to $400,000 a year, typically spread over 2 to 3 years. And we have a track for instrumentation acquisition. We won't make many awards here, maybe 4 awards each, totaling $400,000, maybe to $500,000 a year, spread over 2 to 3 years. The instrumentation project shouldn't simply be a laundry list of things that you want. It would have to be integrated into some sort of change in your undergraduate curriculum, for example. Next slide. We will still continue to fund a few centers. Centers for funding for any center would be $5 million. Usually centers last for 5 years, with a possibility of a competitive grant renewal for $5 million for an additional 5 years. We'll probably only make 1 or 2 awards, new awards each year. And then we also have resource centers. These are smaller awards where typically a national center, after they've been running for 5 to 10 years, can become a resource center where they would then serve, just as what the name implies, as a resource to other community colleges in that particular topic area. Funding for a resource center would be about $600,000 spread over 3 years, with a possibility of competitive renewal for an additional 3 years. So we'll expect to make 1 or 2 awards of these each year as well. And if you're thinking about submitting a center in the future, we also offer planning grants for centers. We'll typically offer 1 or 2 of these each year for up to $70,000 each to develop well-formulated plans for a future center. Next slide. And then we have a program for targeted research on technician education. And these can be up to 5 new awards. They range from $150,000 up to 2 years, or up to $80,000 up to 3 years, depending on the nature of the award. And this is like not research for undergraduates or research technicians, but this is research on what programs are most effective in training our new technicians. So it's an educational research piece that we're looking for here. what's the best way for a two-year university, two-year college to educate new technicians? Next slide.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Okay, as we said in the title, we're all about innovation. Innovation is defined as a new method, a new idea, or a new project, but what does that mean in terms of an NSF ATE proposal? And do recall that the ATE program is focused on technician education. I don't know that we specifically call that out today. We have to worry about what is the need. There is no need for a proposal, and if there is no need to do something that is totally new or something that is new to your college or group of college. If you're going for something that is new to your college or group of college, you do need to provide evidence that it has been successful, whatever you're pursuing, somewhere else, and you want to consider adopting and adapting to fit your needs. That's certainly acceptable within the ATE program. It's also extremely important to have employers involved. Business and industry must validate that whatever you're doing fits with their needs. The Technician Education Program is aimed at educating technicians for the workforce. So it's very, very important to have business and industry validation that there is a need for what you're doing, and it's also very important for them to document their commitment to help you with the work via their commitment letters. And we'll talk about that later in this series of presentations, perhaps not today. How are you going to address the needs? The goals and objectives and activities are necessary to explain in great detail how you plan to meet the need that you have outlined. Roughly 3 to 4 goals is appropriate with associated objectives and activities, and it's very important to have detail. Consider having SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T, specific, measurable, agreed upon, relevant, and time-based goals. And I'm not going to go into the details here because we talked about that last year in the February 16th webinar. So if you want to know some more detail about that, go back to that webinar and listen, and I think you'll find it there. But suffice it to say that more detail is better than less detail. Generalities typically do not review well. How are you going to document your own qualifications and the qualifications of the team? It's very important that you document the background for the principal investigator and up to 4 co-principal investigators who also must show their qualifications. There are specific requirements for how you detail these bio sketches in the PAPPG, and that's what Dr. Campbell is going to talk about later on in this presentation. Also, think about how your work will be evaluated. How will you know if it was effective? It's a whole lot more than I am going to have an event and I expect 100 people to come, and I consider it a success just because I got 100 people to come. What did you actually accomplish? And overall, in the entire proposal, it's good to have 3 or 4 key research questions that you as principal investigator want to have answered. And for that, you need to figure out what evidence you're going to collect along the way to determine whether or not your work has been successful and what impact it actually made. A question that is common to ask, that is very important to ask, is what difference will your work really make? What impact will it have on students? It's also important to list a planned evaluator if you possibly can. I know that some colleges have to put the evaluation contract out for bid, but it's possible you might be able to get an evaluator to help you along the way so that you can figure out what these questions need to be if this is something new to you. It's also very important to have an evaluation report every year. The National Science Foundation expects to see that, and you need to have plans for that. It's nice to call those out during the proposal. How will you disseminate your work? How are you going to share? All of the work that is funded through the ATE program is funded through taxpayer dollars. So how are you going to share what you learn? It's important to share not only your successes, but also your lessons learned along the way. Are you going to share it through a website? that's probably not sufficient because in this day and age, we're also using social media, conference presentations, other publications. It's very important for you to detail what you plan to do, how you plan to share the information that you learn. Also, there is an A2E proposal preparation template that is with last year's webinar that was on February 16th. It is meant to provide you a framework for preparing your proposal. There are boxes in each area that you can drop information as you get it into those boxes, and that should help guide your preparation of a competitive proposal. Okay, Dr. Campbell, would you take over from here and talk about the changes in the PAPPG?
Sure. Thanks, Ann. So there is a general proposal and award policies and procedures guide. It takes for fascinating reading, but certainly your sponsored research officer should be very, very familiar with this document, and it wouldn't hurt for you as the principal investigator to be familiar with it as well. In addition to the solicitation, the PAPPG outlines the general rules and regulations for preparing your proposal and submitting it. In cases where there's a discrepancy in what you have to do between the solicitation and the PAPPG, the solicitation usually takes precedence, but if the solicitation is silent about something, then you should refer to the Proposal and Award Procedures Guide for that information. So any proposal now submitted after January 29th, you have to follow the new regulations. I'm just going to go over some of the changes that have taken place in the past year in this guide. Next slide. So the big changes are revised some eligibility standards. So we've added a new subcategory for institutions of higher education. So we used to have colleges and universities and stuff, and it's kind of redundant. So now we've kind of lumped them all together into one category for institutions of higher education. We revised the eligibility of foreign organizations, particularly for subawards, and we've given solicitations the authority to add more restrictive language. Next slide. So one thing that we've heard a lot of people complain about was they didn't have enough room in the budget justification to describe how they're going to spend the money. So we've increased the budget justification from a 3-page limit to a 5-page limit if you need it. We've also implemented a pilot program on collaborators and other affiliations. So we have a template now that mirrors the contents of the proposals and procedures guides, put in a few footnotes, and we've got a big frequently asked questions section that you can put in there as well. But typically we like to have, we need to know the collaborators and other affiliations for all of the principal investigators, so that when we contact external reviewers to review the proposal, we need to know who to contact and who not to contact to avoid conflicts of interest. And next slide. We've made a few changes such that the project description now has to contain a separate section labeled intellectual merit. So in your you always have to put in a 1-page project summary that talks about intellectual merit and broader impacts. But now within the 15-page project description as well, you also have to have a section labeled intellectual merit and broader impacts. We've also clarified that the 5-year period of support and results from the prior NSF support talks about an end date. So if you've had a project with an end date in the last 5 years, you have to describe the results of that information. That's just sort of a clarification aspect there. And then we also remind organizations it's their responsibility to define and consistently apply the term year in the senior personnel salaries and wages and policy section. So when you put in your request for salary, you have the chance to, the ability to put things in for calendar year or academic year, et cetera. So we just need you to define explicitly what you mean by year and when that year begins and ends. Next slide. Vertebrate animals, I don't think really applies much for education projects, but we have revised standards for those proposals that deal with working with animals. Next slide. But we also have updated human subjects coverage. Okay, So we've added some language to reflect the organizational responsibilities. We've added language on post-award responsibilities, stating that the IRB approval has to be obtained if the protocols for the use of the human subjects have been changed substantively from those originally proposed and approved. So this is after the award has been made. If you've made a change in your research methodology, for instance, on how you're going to be interviewing students or collecting student data, then you would need to send us an updated IRB approval document. And then we've also added some language regarding supplemental funding so that the supplement doesn't have to have a separate IRB approval letter unless the project has changed. Next slide. This is a slide about, we had a chart that outlined all of the notifications and requests. Because, typically something changes in the process of once you've gotten an award. The PI changes, you might want to get some more money, you might want to move some money around within your budget, you might want to change people. There's lots of things that happen. There's a lot of notifications and requests that come in. So we've put things that used to be in Chapter 7, and we've put them all together in one appendix. And so the next slide is going to look really crowded, but let me show it to you next. So you can look this up in the proposals and policies guide, but the cool thing about this is that NSF has gotten together with other federal agencies such as Department of Education, NASA, Department of Labor, etc. We've tried to get coordinated and consistent about what we do for notifications and requests, so that we're kind of standardizing our notifications and requests across all of the federal agencies. And so when you go into the PAPPG, you can find this appendix and look up ahead of time and see when you need to file a notification or request, and if any of the different government agencies has a different sort of policy or procedure. Next slide. Okay. Some people will want to submit proposals through the grants.gov option versus FastLane. So FastLane goes directly into NSF. If you apply to submit a proposal via grants.gov, your proposal will go to grants.gov. Once it goes from grants.gov, grants.gov sends it to NSF. NSF tries to put it into FastLane, and if everything works, then fine. But if it doesn't work, it goes back to grants.gov, and then it goes back to you and saying you've got a problem. So to try to avoid or head off any potential problems, we have a separate document that is for people who want to submit an NSF proposal through grants.gov. And so this guide is available on the NSF website. Next slide. Okay, and so here's a link here that you can go on to. There's a little video that talks about these updates, gives you a little bit of webinar and a little bit more detail about some of the aspects that I've just covered. And I think that's it on mine. Yep.
That's it. Okay, Christina, would you tell people how they may ask questions at this point? It says you're speaking, but I'm not hearing you. I think you need to unmute. Christina?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so as of now for questions, if you have a question that you would like to ask Ann or David, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you so that you can ask your question to them. Or you can type your question into the Q&A box and we will read it out loud.
And I have a couple of questions I can start with. Dr. Campbell, could you explain why we have to get an IRB before we get funded for our proposal?
A lot of this has to do with accountability. We want to make sure that the identity of students is protected and that the data that is used using human subjects is properly handled. We have gotten a little bit more lenient in the sense that you can submit a tentative IRB plan, which means that you could get the award process started. We can give you the money, but there would be a caveat that you would not be allowed to conduct research using human subjects until the IRB approval is in hand. So we've gotten a little bit more lenient in that sense, so that you can put in like a tentative IRB approval, but you really can't start any of your real research using students until the appropriate IRB is in there.
Okay, and what if our college does not have an institutional review board? How do we handle it at that point?
Yeah, what a lot of institutions will do is, especially community colleges, is they will get in touch with a neighboring four-year institution, and typically they're nice people, and they'll take you under their wing and allow you to submit the proposal through them, and they can approve or disapprove of your IRB. There's also a lot of independent organizations that have popped up that might charge a fee for doing such an IRB review, so that's another possibility as well. You can also get your own certification for IRB at the institution. It takes a while to go through the proper training, etc., but that's another option as well if you're going to be doing many education grants in the future.
Okay. Here's another question. Our college has had a significant several $million-dollar TACT grant. Can we apply to NSF to continue our work?
Maybe. The thing is, like for the ATE program, what we like to do is start new things. And we're not in things for a long haul. So if the proposal comes in and it's simply just doing the same old, just more years, it probably won't be competitive. But if you wanted to leverage the TACT award and say, we've learned this, and we think if we do something new based on the research and the data that we've collected under the TACT award, we want to try out this new area of research or education might be fruitful, then that would be sort of a more competitive type of proposal.
Okay. And one more, and then I'm going to turn it back to Christina and see if we have anybody with hands up. What about FastLane and grants.gov? Why would I use grants.gov if there is no compliance checking there?
Okay, you got me at a hard spot here. Okay, I'm not supposed to say don't use grants.gov.
Okay, well let me say I would prefer not to use it.
Yeah, most people that have never submitted either in the past, most new users find FastLane to be more user-friendly. But grants.gov is something that you can use to apply for all grants in all federal agencies, NASA, NOAA, Department of Labor, etc. So, you know, some people might want to get familiar with the grants.gov process because they might be using it when they're applying to many other federal agencies as well.
Okay. We also have another question about the preparation template. That is on atecenters.org/CCTA, and you would need to look at the webinars from last year, the pre-recorded webinars. The pre-recorded webinars are for February 16th, actually has the slides, it has the recording, and it has the template with it. And we have another question. Can you point out the possible deadlines for these grant opportunities, Dr. Campbell?
The next deadline for the ATE program, I believe, don't hold me to the exact date, it's early October 2018. I think it's October 4th, 2018 this year.
Yes.
When you go to the cover page of the ATE solicitation, it lists the deadlines for last year, this year coming up, and for 2019 as well.
Okay. Christina, do we have anyone with a hand up?
I do not have one at this moment. You've gotten all the questions I have.
Okay.
Actually, it looks like we might have another one.
Okay.
Oh, they're asking if we can post the URL for the template, and we can.
Sure. Okay, we can post that along with this recording as we go through. Okay, what happens, Dr. Campbell, if we plan to submit on October 4th and something happens, the SRO is out of town or whatever, and we can't submit until October 5th?
Well, there's always next year. We are very firm about closing our deadline at 5 o'clock local time on the day of the proposal is due. So I always recommend getting the proposal in a couple of days early. Most people don't realize this, but you can, once if you say you've submitted the proposal like 3 days early, and then you've noticed that you want to change something, you can do that. You can go in and do a proposal file update up until 5 o'clock local time. So you don't have to wait until everything is absolutely, all your ducks in a row before you push that submit button. You can get it in ahead of time, and if you need to edit it, you can.
Okay, I have another question. How are these proposals actually evaluated, and how do colleges get notified as to whether they are accepted or declined?
Okay, so for, let's say, the ATE program, for instance, proposals come in early October. Sometime in early December, we have review panels. So during that month, I've contacted community college faculty, industry people, subject matter experts across the nation, and I've invited them to come to NSF to review the proposals. And so we have a bunch of review panels. A typical panel might have 20 proposals on it with maybe 6 or so reviewers. And the reviewers will have read the proposals, written their reviews. They come to NSF, they discuss the proposals over 2 days. They give me advice about which ones they think are the really, really good ones, the ones that are mediocre, and the ones that really aren't that great. I take that advice very seriously, and then I talk it over with other program officers, and we make our recommendations. Typically, the ones that are highly rated, I'll contact the principal investigator. We never just throw the check in the mail. We just say, because there's always room for improvement. The reviewers always give me lots of advice about how to improve the proposals. I pass that advice to the principal investigator. We go back and forth. I might make some budget changes. And typically, within about 3 or 4 months from the time of submission, the proposal is in pretty much of a good shape that I can make my recommendation for funding. The proposals that aren't recommended for funding, we'll probably turn those around again in about 4 or 5 months as well. Our ultimate goal is to try to process all proposals within a 6-month period so that you would know for sure whether or not you will be funded or not funded in that 6-month period.
Okay. I have someone who evidently sent a question directly to you, Dr. Campbell. You might look.
Actually, she wants to ask a question.
Okay, terrific. That's great.
I'm going to unmute Suzanne to ask her question. Okay, Suzanne, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for hosting this important webinar today. Hi, Dr. Campbell. It's Suzanne at Columbia Gorge Community College in Oregon. And the question is are you available to review a one-page concept summary in advance of a proposal preparation? We are finishing up our first NSF grant and intend on applying for an ATE grant that's due in October.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. If nobody had asked the question, I was going to volunteer it. But yeah, a one-page synopsis of what you want to do is fine. You send that to me by email. I'll look it over, and I'll try to get back to you within a week or so. And I'll let you know, you're on the right track. I might give you some suggestions for improvement. I might say no. There might be another program, for instance, at NSF. There's something like 30 programs in the Education Directorate. I might say you might want to try this program as well. If it's not in my area of expertise, I'm a biologist, so if something comes in dealing with mathematics, I'll forward it to another program officer who deals with mathematics education. But yeah, a one-pager is fine. I cannot review an entire proposal, but one-pagers are certainly welcome for us to review ahead of time. And also, we have tons of emails. I probably get about 100 or so a day. And so if you don't hear back from us in a week, don't hesitate to ping us again. You're not harassing us. You're sending us necessary reminders.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I also have a question from Pete. So Pete, you are now unmute to ask your question.
but I'm not hearing Pete.
I'm not either.
Pete, you might want to type your question into the question box. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Sorry about that. Hi, this is Pete Maritato from Suffolk Community College. Thank you for doing this. It's extremely helpful. We are just finishing an NSF grant towards a very successful cybersecurity program, which we launched this year. But the thing that we're looking at now, and you mentioned about the research program for the technician training, we're coming up with some type of new approach to educating technicians. And one of the things we're thinking about is just a quick question is in collaboration, typically collaboration is outside the college with another college, but if doing things where we have our electrical technology program, we see a high need in marrying technical training with the automotive industry. We just had Tesla in here today, and we can see that a collaboration between those to develop a new technician that meets the needs not only of the automotive, but also of the power industry. Would that be something that falls under the research program?
I don't think that would fall under the targeted research program. I think that would fall under a regular ATE project. I mean, you're certainly moving into a new area, but you're not actually doing research on how you're teaching your students.
Okay.
But it sounds promising. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay, that's the last hand raise I have, but there was a question in the chat, and the question is, of the most recent ATE grant competition, when will awards be announced or our college receive notification?
I know the program that I did, I'm still negotiating with principal investigators back and forth. I don't think we've made, I think we might have made only one award out of the most recent thing, so everything's still working in the pipeline right now. And most program officers don't just work with one program, like I work at 5 or 6 different programs. And so I know in the undergraduate division, they just finished a bunch of panel reviews for the IUSE program. And so most people that work with ATE also work with IUSE. So it's a busy time of year, but I would expect that within the next 2 months, most people will be notified or have a good idea whether they'll be funded or not.
Okay, another question here. What about the business involvement or industry involvement? What happens if we just know that the thing that we're doing is very important, or our project is very important, but we don't have employers involved? Is there any chance that we're going to be funded?
There may be a chance, but you got to put yourself in the shoes of the reviewer. Reviewers might say, well, why haven't these people contacted any industry professionals? How do we know that there are jobs out there that these graduates are going to be able to walk into when they come out? So if there's a good reason why you don't have industry input, you should address that in the proposal. And you'd have to be able to put that reviewer's mind at ease, justifying and let them know why you don't have that input. So the reviewers are pretty responsible people, and competition can be stiff. I think for most projects, only about 20% of the proposals end up becoming awards. So it is very competitive. So you want to put yourself in a position where you're looking good and looking better than other people in that area.
And another question, Dr. Campbell, how would we figure out who else is doing work through the National Science Foundation or anything else in our area so that we don't duplicate work?
Okay. On the NSF website, there's an area that's marked awards and another place that's marked search awards. And you can click on an icon that says advanced search, and it's quite amazing. You can type in the subject matter, like biochemistry, for instance. You can put in the state, things of that nature, and you can just click on, what has NSF funded in your state in biochemistry, and all those awards will pop up. You can also filter it down just by the ATE program if you want, or you can just filter it down to all education awards that we've made as well. So it's a great search engine to let you know what we've funded recently in what areas and what geographical areas as well.
So will that allow me to look at the actual proposal that was submitted, or what do I get to see and how do I get information?
No. What you will see is an abstract of the award. You'll see who the principal investigator is and the contact information and how much money they've been awarded. We cannot give out proposals because they are the intellectual property of the principal investigator. And we also do not acknowledge the existence of any proposal that has been declined. So if you ask us about something else that didn't become an award, we'll say we don't know what you're talking about. If you wanted to look at a proposal that was successful, you're free to contact the principal investigator on your own and ask him or her, can I look at your proposal? And it's up to them. Sometimes they're really nice and say, yeah, sure, take a look at mine. Others will say, well, maybe, but I'll give you some advice about, how I prepared my proposal, et cetera. It's a pretty good community, but it would be up to you. We cannot give you that information directly.
Okay. Christina, any more questions? Does anybody else wish to raise their hand and ask questions?
I have not received anything else.
Okay. We are going to have 3 more webinars in this series. We decided we would repeat the same topics as last year, but perhaps give you a different view. So hopefully all of you have viewed the previous webinar on February 16th of 2017, and if not, please go back and do so, recognizing that at the time we did the webinar in 2017, we did not have the latest solicitation just yet. So the information about the specifics of the solicitation are very, very important, so you would use this information from today to replace anything that we said last year with respect to that. One bit of information I would provide is that I highly suggest that you read the solicitation, and then you read it again, and then you read it again, and you take notes each time. There are lots of details in the solicitation that you're expected to follow, adhere to, answer the questions, and sometimes when I have reviewed proposals in the past, some of the issues have been from basically not reading the solicitation. Dr. Campbell, would you make any comments about that?
I don't think so. I was just thinking of one other question that has been on a lot of people's minds lately is that because Congress put in that extra $500 billion in the 2-year spending deal, the best prediction that I can give right now is that NSF will be flat funded for the next 2 years. So the ATE program has been chugging along at about $60 to $65 million a year. And so our best, even though we don't have a budget for 2018, our best guess is that we'll be flat funded for the next 2 years at about that level.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to go on with the rest of the presentation, but then if you come up with some questions, we'll circle back around and ask some questions at the very end. We would like to be sure to invite you to join us on March 8th. This is the second in a series of 4, talking about the grant proposal resources, roadmaps, and timelines. The original webinar was held on March 9th of 2017. So you want to go back and look at that, but then Dr. Elizabeth Tellis, who was one of 2 people in the program officer pool who established the ATE program, will be working with Elaine Kraft to explain any kind of differences or other points that would be appropriate to make. It is important for you to start your proposal early. This is not too soon for you to start writing that proposal and pulling all the pieces together. Having led a TACT grant, I will say that there are a lot of moving parts to pull together in a National Science Foundation grant. It's a little bit different, not necessarily harder, just different. Also, we are running a convening at the Innovations Conference, the League for Innovations Conference, that is March 18th through the 21st this year at National Harbor, Maryland. We will be doing a CCTA workshop that will be on Monday afternoon from approximately 1:30 to 5. We will have a program officer with us. We'll also have several people who are leading centers and major projects there to work with you in a panel format and also to work with you around tables to actually discuss your ideas. So if you are attending that conference or wish to attend that conference to get some individual help, please plan on doing so. Then in Miami, we have another opportunity. The annual High Tech Conference is in its 10th year this year. This is a convening that is, or a conference that is sponsored primarily by projects and centers through the National Science Foundation across the country. And then on the day after, on the 29th of July, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, yes, 9th. I had to make sure I had the right date. On the 29th in the morning from 8:30 to 12:30, we will have a similar type workshop to what we're holding at the Innovations Conference on the 19th of March. Please plan to take advantage of these sorts of things because that's an opportunity for you to get one-on-one assistance. And here's how you would register for the High Tech Conference. The High Tech registration just went up today, and we would welcome you at that conference. Here's our contact information. I'm willing to answer questions, and I know Dr. Campbell is as well. And last, I will ask one more time if we have any other questions that you've thought of that you want to ask. Please raise your hand.
We don't have any.
Okay, so I'm going to call this webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank Dr. Campbell for participating with us. Thank you for attending, and please look for a link to the recording in your email. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.